right. Hello, everyone. Olin Giles here with Why Christianity. Welcome back. Tonight we're going to continue our series looking at a very excellent evangelism approach to Muslims. I have my Canadian friends with me once again, but real quickly, before we bring them on, I want to remind you of our website, radicaltruth.net. Please go there and check out all the videos and resources and news articles that we have. And also want to remind you about the upcoming Our Strong Tower conference that we have coming up in California in September 13th through the 15th. We will also have some events that are following this beyond Our Strong Tower, and some outreach and just several other things that we're doing. So please be in prayer about this event, and just pray that the Lord would use us. It looks like a great conference. I'm going to tell you what, I think this is probably one of the best. We've got Al Fadi, Jay Smith, Daniel Brubaker, and many, many more. I probably shouldn't have started naming names there, but Anthony Rogers, Dr. Edward Dalcour. You can go to ministrytomuslims.com and find out more information. This conference will also be live streamed in case you can't make it to California. You can just log on to your computer and watch it from there. And we would just love for you to join us any way that you can. I know you're going to be blessed. And I also know that you're going to be blessed tonight. I have back with me Pastor Greg and Alex. Welcome, guys. Welcome back. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Doing well. How are you?
Doing very well. It's been a busy day, or it's been a busy week. I've just had numerous things going on, and it just seems like everyday life gets busier. I keep thinking one day that it's going to slow down a little bit, but anyhow, glad that you're back with me tonight. I really, really enjoyed your last presentation. I found it very helpful, and you brought some clarity to what you were saying, I think. And I'm super excited about tonight as well. I think just from what I've heard so far, it's going to be even better. So, anything you guys would like to share before you get started? Your website, maybe?
Maybe I could. Oh, yeah, sure. Well, for myself, I have a YouTube channel called Until All Hear.
Okay.
Here is an HEAR. We haven't put up content recently, but we're going to be getting back to that soon. But definitely there are videos on there, and would love for people to subscribe so when we do have new content that they'll see that it comes up. Yeah, I know that. Alex, you want to share anything you want to plug, or?
Oh, I'm gonna start presentation soon. So.
Okay, so before you do, I'll just kind of do maybe a bit of a recap.
That'll work.
Yeah. Well, the first video did with you, Olin, was just like a general overview, so that's helpful for people to go there. Now we're getting into the meat of it and the specifics, which is really where it matters. So the second video we did, and this is the third, the last one was on how the first point we established, we go through, is that the Qur'an affirms the Torah in the time of Muhammad in the 7th century AD. And then we bring up the fact about manuscripts that we have about the Testament that predate the time of Muhammad. And so then we can now, what we're aiming, the whole point of this method, how we're going to move into, is comparing the stories, the narratives that are parallel between the Quran and specifically the Old Testament, and especially the Torah itself, the first 5 books. So that's what we're going to do today. So we've only really done the first of 5 main points that we go through with deconstructing the Quran and Islam before we relay the Old Testament foundations of the true Old Testament foundations, and then we get to the gospel. That's our approach, those 3 main steps. So the first main step is the big one, which is deconstructing. and we've done the first part of that, which is establishing the Torah. Now we're going to do the comparison. And so why don't I hand it over to you, Alex, and I will mute myself.
Okay.
All right. Before you get started, Alex, let me just remind everybody, and I'll post it in the comments as well. You guys are always open to answering some questions that people may have. So please post those in the comments section if you have them, and we'll try to get to them at the end. All right. It's all yours, guys. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's show my presentation, please. Yeah. Okay, so just a reminder, we have 3 arguments against Islam, and we call it trilogy, for the lack of a better word. The master key is number 1, global Torah change conspiracy follows it, and Midrash finishes it. So today we're going to continue, of course, with our master key. And master key, like a Greek, so Islam based on the 5 pillars that we talked before. And then pillar number 1, which is Torah was corrupted, that's most of the Muslims will say. Plus, it been basically challenged very effectively by the last hour video, where the Greg did all the talking, and he showed every point from the Quran perspective, where Muhammad and author of the Quran, or Allah, really believed that the Torah in the days of Muhammad was reliable. So therefore, using the Torah to deconstruct the first pillar, which is Torah was supposedly corrupt, but it is not. So today we're going to start the second topic. We're going to address the Quran. First of all, I want to tell you that there are 6,236 verses in the Quran. And you could see, like in Torah, Tanakh, the Old Testament in general, we can find 1,091 verses of this, when the stories from Adam and Eve and to the Solomon, to the Moses, or well, in that case to Solomon and other prophets, they've been retold in the Quran 1,091 times verses. Everything about Christ, Jesus, Isa, Mary, and John the Baptist is only 113 times, 113 verses. So, and we could see the Torah by far it supersedes all other topics, like everything from Adam to Moses. When the Quran is addressing the stories from the Torah, it's 987 verses. It's like by far its greatest bulk, and therefore I believe we have to address that topic, that issue of the Torah in the Quran, how they relate to each other. In our dialogue with the Muslim, that's number 1 point, and therefore I'm just saying that we have to make the Torah great again in our conversation with Muslims. So let's talk about the second point today. And now this is the second pillar is basically, they say that God, Allah, revealed the original Torah and the Quran. And then question I ask Muslims on the streets, or when I talk to them, do the Quran and the Torah come from the same author? And I'm going to play 2 clips from Christian and Muslim.
I want to tell you, my sisters and brothers, and I really mean what I say, I do believe that we are all God's family, and that we must respect each other, because Muslims and Christians have so much together. Abraham, Moses, Elijah, and even Jesus.
That's very interesting. This pastor who debated Ahmed Didat, he was thinking, he was actually clearly speaking that we have so much together, and all the prophets, we have the same prophets, and we have more in more together than apart, let's say, right? So let's hear other guy, like my favorite and my personal sheikh, Yasser Qadi. So what will he say about?
Just before you play
Another thing that they did.
Sorry.
Yeah, so just before you play the clip, he's going to talk about Joseph, and that's the narrative that we're going to compare next.
Yeah.
So pay attention to what he says about Joseph.
Was they attempted to trick him by asking him questions that they thought he could not answer. And they primarily did this by getting questions from the Yahud. Because the concept of prophecy was not known to the Arabs. They really did not have a concept of somebody communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they knew the Jews believed in this. So they went to them a number of times. And Surah Al-Kahf was revealed because of this. And Surah Isra was revealed because of this. And so the questions were, and Surah Yusuf was revealed because of this, right? All of these surahs came down because of these questions. That the Jews said, go and ask him about the Prophet Joseph. What does he know about Joseph? And so Allah revealed in the Qur'an, all of Surah Yusuf. The Jews said to them, ask him about the Ruh. What is the Ruh? وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Right? The Yahud said, ask him about Dhul Kifl. Ask him about, Dhul Qarnayn. Dhul Qarnayn. What does he know of Dhul Qarnayn? And so, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed about Dhul Qarnayn. And they kept on asking. And whatever they asked, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to them. And this again shows us the knowledge that he had. And the greatest miracle in this was that the knowledge of these prophets was not known to the Arabs. Because the Arabs have no lineage with Joseph. The Arabs have no lineage with Moses, with Dhul Qarnayn. What has this got to do with them? The Arabs had no knowledge of any of these prophets and their stories. And there are no books, as we know, there are no libraries. And Mecca is not a center of civilization. Yet, when the Prophet ﷺ is asked about the story of Joseph, and the Quranic story is so similar to the narrative to this day in the Old Testament that it is amazing. It is amazing how this person in the middle of nowhere, without any access to any book, can basically dictate the entire story. And Allah references in the Quran that you did not know these stories before the Quran came down. And by the way, let me just tell you, within academia, this is one of the biggest challenges that to this day people try to decipher. Where did the Prophet get this knowledge from? Of course, we know it came from Allah, but believe me, this is something they have so many attempts and so many theories and so many things to do. I don't want to go into my tangents right now.
Okay, that's amazing clip. In one clip, it tells so many things we can chew on. The number one, of course, he said the story of Joseph in the Quran so similar to the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. That's amazing. And it's amazing how the guy, like illiterate Arab Bedouin of 7th century, was able to bring so many details of the story which is supposed to be matching with the Old Testament, right? And then he said, all the Western academics, they have so many theories about how the Quran came to exist, and they don't know. And well, we're gonna, spoiler alert, we will deal with that later on in now the final part of the trilogy.
One thing he said, not only is it similar, it's so similar to this day.
To this day, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's till even so the present version of the Torah,
absolutely.
The story
That's
of
a
Joseph
good point.
is so similar even, right?
Yeah, good point.
Another thing that...
Okay, so by definition, we'll go to Surah Yusuf, and now we're gonna give like what basically I will say. I'll give like stage to Greg, and we talk about long version from the personal evangelism. So Greg, you can start sharing your screen.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if Olin is still there. I was hoping, and I don't think we talked about this before, was actually I'd like to interact with you over it.
Okay.
Is Olin there? Maybe he walked away. And
yeah,
no, that's the wrong one. Stop that.
Because
I think Olin isn't there. I'm just gonna go back to the sharing screen. Maybe just message him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to pull up, if you're watching and you have your own copy of the Quran, or you want to pull it up online, I'm going to be sharing Surah 12. So, no, that's not that. This one will do it. Window. That's the one.
Can you share your screen?
Yeah, it's going. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to compare a section in the story of Joseph from the Quran and Genesis, and it should come up now. Can you stop sharing your screen? I'm still seeing yours. Yeah. So mine should come up, unless we need it approved by Olin, and Olin stepped away. Yeah, bear with us here, guys. Let me try it again now that you've stopped sharing. Window.
Yeah, I think you should approve it. Let's see if I can share.
Let's share now. Hold on.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So is Olin there yet? Olin, if you're there, we can't hear you.
You want me to join you?
Yeah. We want you to join us. Okay, perfect. All right. So what I want to do is kind of interact with you the way that I would interact with a Muslim person normally in conversation, so that we can get it it'll be nice to have it a bit more interactive where we're looking at the text. So what we're going to do is, since we just established up until this point that the Quran affirms the Torah in the time of Muhammad, we have manuscripts that predate it, and those manuscripts inform modern translations of it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to compare a narrative as an example. So the example we're going to use, and you can see it on the screen, this is Surah 12, Surah Yusuf, okay? And pretty much the last verse that we will read before we transition is this verse 3. And it says, we relate, can I highlight it? Yeah, great. So we relate to you, O Prophet, the best of stories through our revelation of this Quran, though before this you were totally unaware of them. And this is the point that in the video with Yasser Qadi, he was just making a lot about, which is that the Arabs in the time of Muhammad in his region, including himself, didn't know these stories that were in the previous scriptures. And as we saw from the last verse of this surah, 111, it says that in the stories of the prophets, we see that the message of the Quran is a confirmation of the previous revelations, the previous scriptures, in a detailed explanation. So what we should expect is that the stories will be corroborated when we compare it, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a section. We're going to start with the Quranic version. And I always do this. I start with the Quranic version, unless we're doing like a very complicated story, which we'll do on other occasions. Okay, so starting at verse 4, which is the very next verse, this is where we start, and we go from verse 4 down to verse 20. Okay, so you'll see verse 20, you'll see the little heading here. This is the Clear Quran. Clear Quran is very helpful because it has headings in the text, and so it helps you actually navigate what it's talking about in the context. And verse 20, it ends with Joseph being sold and being taken down to Egypt. Okay. So that's the end of the story that we're going to compare. The beginning of it is he has a dream. Okay. And all of this is going to be parallel. We're going to read this section from verse 4 to verse 20 of chapter 12 in the Quran, Surah 12. And we're going to compare it with Genesis 37, the whole chapter. Okay. So it's going to be a bunch of reading we're going to do today. But what I want you to do first, what we're going to do is we're going to read this story in the Quran, and we're not going to do any evaluation or any critique yet. All we're going to do is exegesis. Because we want to establish the fact, look, all we need to do is accurately understand what it says, then put it side by side with the other parallel narrative, understand what that says, and compare it then. So we start with the Quranic version, and I do this with Muslims to make sure that we reestablish what does the Quran actually say about the story, and not just maybe what they're remembering about a story. Just like a Christian might not remember everything correctly about a story in the Bible, compare with actually what does the text say, right? Because it's the text that's authoritative. So that's what we're going to do for both versions. So let's start with verses 4 to 6, and then I'm just going to every little section we're going to stop, and I'm going to ask a few questions, the questions that I would ask a Muslim. And if you can't answer it, Olin, I'm going to be asking you. I'll answer the question. Okay.
Okay.
So don't feel stressed about it. So verse 4, it says, remember when Joseph said to his father, "Oh, my dear father, I dreamt of 11 stars and the sun and the moon, and I saw them prostrating to me. He replied, so he is Jacob, his father. He replied, "Oh, my dear son, do not relate your vision to your brothers, or they will devise a plot against you. Surely Satan is a sworn enemy to humankind, and so will your Lord choose you, O Joseph, and teach you the interpretation of dreams, and perfect his favor upon you and the descendants of Jacob, just as he once perfected upon your forefathers Abraham and Isaac. Surely your Lord is all-knowing, all-wise." Okay, so this is the first part. So what happens here, Olin, from what you can tell?
Joseph has a dream, and it's been a while since I've read this passage, but a lot of it sounds very similar to, or at least the first part of it sounds very similar.
We're not doing comparison yet. Let's just focus on what it says.
I got you. Okay.
And try to disconnect it from your understanding of the Bible.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. That's hard to do, but
it is hard to do, and that's why it's so. That's why we start with one at a time.
Yeah.
Don't compare yet.
Okay, so it says,
so go back to verse 4. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right.
So
he
Joseph
has a dream, 11 stars in the sun and the moon.
Who does he tell the dream to?
To his father.
Okay, so that'd be Jacob, his father. Does he tell it to anybody else?
Not that I see here.
Yeah. What is this? How does his father react? Does he get upset? Is he angry about the dream, or how does he react?
He says, "Do not relate your vision to your brothers, or they will devise a plot against you."
Okay. And then he also said, good. So that means let's say he's concerned. Okay. So he's concerned that if he tells his brothers, then they're going to plot against him. So he's warning, don't tell your brothers.
Right.
So in other words, he doesn't tell his brothers. And when we read the rest of the narrative, we're going to see he doesn't tell his brothers. Okay. So he only tells his father, he doesn't tell his brothers. His father warns him, don't tell your brothers. Otherwise, they're going to become jealous. And Satan will use that as an opportunity to make them jealous. And then verse 6, it said, Jacob tells Joseph that the Lord will choose you and teach you the interpretation of dreams. Okay, so in other words, you have to think about it from an Islamic perspective. They believe that Jacob, the father, is a prophet, and Joseph will become a prophet. So he has a dream. He tells the dream, which is a prophetic dream, to his father, who is a prophet. And the prophet, his father, knows that it's a prophetic dream. But Joseph doesn't seem to at least doesn't know how to interpret the dream, which tells you he's not a prophet yet. Okay. So key question we ask Muslims, and I don't think you'll be able to answer the question from what we have so far. But if you ask a Muslim, so how old would you say Joseph is at this part in the story? Okay, so all that we have is he's telling the dream to his father, and his father warns him, and he says, God will teach you the interpretation of dreams. So one point about his age that's related, it doesn't say his age explicitly, but he must be pretty young because he's not old enough to be a prophet yet. Because in Islamic teaching on prophethood, you have to reach maturity to become a prophet. So he hasn't yet reached an age of maturity. And generally, the Islamic position is that he is 5 to 7 years old, maybe 5 to 10 years old. Okay, so some Muslims will answer the question if you ask them. And the questions I'm asking you, these are the questions I would ask them. Who does he tell the dream to? How does his father react to the dream? How old is Joseph? And so it's not as clear about the age of Joseph here, but that's one indication in this text so far. And we're going to see other indications that make it more clear that he's a child. Sometimes when I ask the question, Muslims will think, oh, he's a teenager. I think some people told me he's like 16. He's not a teenager in Islam. Okay, definitely not a teenager, and we'll make that very clear as we go. But I want you to keep that in mind. That's one of the indications that he's young, is that. Okay, so let's keep going. So verse 7. Indeed, in the story of Joseph and his brothers, there are lessons for all who ask. Verse 8. Remember when they said to one another, so this would be the brothers, Surely Joseph and his brother Benjamin are more. Now notice you can see Benjamin is in brackets. Okay, so it doesn't actually have the name in the text. Okay, so it's surely Joseph and his brother are more beloved to our father than we, even though we are a group of so many. Indeed, our father is clearly mistaken. Kill Joseph or cast him out to some distant land so that our father's attention will be only ours. Then after that you may repent and become righteous people. One of them said, don't kill Joseph, but if you must do something, throw him into the bottom of a well, so perhaps he may be picked up by some travelers. We're going to read the next verse just to help us answer one of the questions. Verse 11. They said, so the brothers said, "Oh, our father, why do you not trust us with Joseph, although we truly wish him well?" Okay, we're going to come back to that. Okay, so let's go back. What happens in especially verses 8 to 10?
They're basically jealous.
Mm-hmm.
And
have they heard the dream?
No.
No. Yeah. But they're jealous anyway.
Right.
Why are they jealous?
Because he's more beloved to his father than they are.
Yeah. Okay. He and his brother. It's kind of funny because they're his brothers, and they mention him and his brother. It's kind of funny throughout the Qur'an. None of the brothers are named. Only Joseph is named and Jacob is named.
Have to help Allah out by putting the
right
name.
Exactly, right. Okay, so all right, so anyway, they're jealous for whatever reason. Is they think that their father regards them as more beloved than them, even though there's so many of them. Okay, so then what's their plot?
To kill Joseph
or
cast him into this well, one of them says.
Right, so verse 9, they say kill him or send him away to a distant land, right? Okay. So, but then one of them, again unnamed, interjects and says, let's not kill him. Let's throw him into the bottom of a well, like in hopes, perhaps, maybe the caravan might stumble upon him. It's really funny, okay, how they know that a caravan will just happen to stumble upon him, okay? So in other words, now they're decided. Their plan is done. Okay. And then the next verse, they go and approach their father. Okay. So the fact that the next verse has them approaching their father, where approximately were they when they were plotting and decided their plan against Joseph?
Not sure.
Okay, so it doesn't give you the geography.
Yeah.
So then I'd say, okay, were they inside the house with Jacob, their father?
Wouldn't think so, would you?
No, because they had to go to him.
Yeah.
Right? And they're obviously not going to hatch their scheme with him in their hearing. So in other words, they're not in the house. They're not inside the house with their father. They're outside, or they're out of maybe they walked outside off the property, okay, into the woods a little bit, had their little, powwow and came up with their plan, and then they came back and they approached their father, right? In other words, they're not very far from home. Okay. Next part. Let's reread 11. They said, "Oh, our father, why do you not trust us with Joseph, although we truly wish him well? Send him out with us tomorrow so that he may enjoy himself and play. And we will really watch over him." He responded, "It would truly sadden me if you took him away with you, and I fear that a wolf may devour him while you are negligent of him." They said, "If a wolf were to devour him, despite our strong group, then we would certainly be losers." And so when they took him away and decided to throw him into the bottom of the well, that's Allah, we inspired him. One day you will remind them of this deed of theirs while they are unaware of who you are. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back. They approach their father. They're asking their father, "Let Joseph come out with us." And notice it says in verse 12, "Send him out with us tomorrow so that he may enjoy himself and play, and we will really watch over him." So how old is Joseph?
Seems pretty young.
Right. Young enough that they have to ask for permission. They're reassuring him that they're going to give supervision, and so that he can play. He's definitely not a teenager. He is a child. Okay? And that's why
a babysitter.
Yeah, he needs a babysitter. Right? And this is in ancient times, right? You're like generally you would have more responsibility, and it's the opposite of helicopter parenting, right?
Right.
So here they got to watch over him. They got to convince him. Now Jacob, does he trust them?
No, I mean, seems like they're trying to convince him in verse 12 there, and then he really doesn't trust them in verse 13.
Yeah, so he says in verse 13, if you take him, I'm worried that the world's going to devour him while you're negligent. So that's, again, they're negligent. He's worried about their negligence. He doesn't trust them in taking care of him. And something bad's going to happen to Joseph if they take him. Okay? They said, like, how's that going to happen if he's with such a big group of ours, a strong group of young men, essentially? Like, we would definitely be, losers, failures, if that were to happen, right? And then verse 15, it just simply says when they took him away. Now, if you go back to the timing of it, verse 12, they're requesting to take him tomorrow. Send him out with us tomorrow. So in other words, they're going to take him. They take him the next day, and then they throw him into the well, and God gives him reassurance with a revelation. You'll remind them of this deed of theirs one day. Okay? Verse 16, we'll read verse 16 to the end of the chapter, and we'll unpack it. So then it says, then they returned to their father in the evening, weeping. They cried, our father, we went racing and left Joseph with our belongings, and a wolf devoured him. But you will not believe us, no matter how truthful we are. And they brought his shirt stained with false blood. He responded, no, your souls must have tempted you to do something evil. So I can only endure with beautiful patience. It is Allah's help that I seek to bear your claims. And there came some travelers, and they sent down their water boy, who let down his bucket into the well. He cried out, whoa, what a great find. Here is a boy. And they took him secretly to be sold as merchandise. But Allah is all-knowing of what they did. They later sold him for a cheap price, just a few silver coins, only wanting to get rid of him. And you can see the next verse mentions Egypt. Okay, so let's unpack this. Go back to verse 16. They return to their father, weeping in the evening. And then they bring the bloody shirt, they're crying, etc. How long have they been away from home?
Looks like less than a day. Or
Yep. What tells you that?
They returned to their father in the evening.
Yeah. So in other words, it said they left. They're asking to leave tomorrow. Then they come back in the evening. So that means they left in the morning, maybe earliest, or probably morning, and they came back before nightfall or at nightfall. So part of a day, less than a day, exactly. And then they cry, our father, we went racing, left Joseph with their belongings, a wolf devoured him. You won't believe us. In other words, they come, they're telling him what happened, right? And they're expecting that they're not going to be trusted. Okay, but they're asserting what happened. Okay, and then they bring the bloody shirt, and they say, they're saying this is his shirt. Joseph was eaten by an animal. Here's the evidence. And then how does Jacob respond? Verse 18.
He doesn't. I mean, again, his kind of his prior, distrust with them has kind of come true.
Yeah.
You must have been tempted to do something evil, he says.
Yeah, he says no, like you did something, and no, it's what you're saying is a lie. So he thinks that they're lying. Okay, so a question I would ask them is, do you think Jacob thinks? Well, one, how did Jacob respond? And then do you think Jacob thinks Joseph is alive or dead? What do you think?
He seems to be unsure.
Okay, so just from those verses, you might think he's unsure.
Yeah.
Okay, so later in the narrative, we see other verses that tell us more, okay, what he thought. But even before we get there, there's some evidence about how we know what he thought, which is that he thought that Joseph was still alive, not dead. And one, he thinks that they're lying and that he wasn't eaten by an animal.
I'll be back.
Oh, you're gonna okay.
I'll
keep explaining it. Sure, just join us. Let us know when you're back. Okay, so the first thing is that we already saw in the narrative earlier on. He has heard the dream from Joseph, and Jacob knows that this is a prophetic dream, and so he knows the dream hasn't yet been fulfilled yet, because Joseph isn't elevated over them. So since it hasn't been fulfilled, then we know that he knows that Joseph has to be alive for him to fulfill the dream. I remember one Muslim, I don't know if it was Nouman Ali Khan or somebody else, Alex, he said the fact that Jacob didn't, when he interpreted the dream, when he heard the dream, he didn't say, there was no inshallah, there was no if God wills. He knows that this is going to take place. Okay. But yeah, we see here in these verses later on in, remind me the context here, Alex. At what point in the trips is it?
Well, that's after second trip.
Yes. So the brothers went down to Egypt 2 times. They're coming back. And then they're asking for him to send. They're already come back after Benjamin was taken, or they're asking?
Yeah, they basically came back to him saying, well, we came back without Benjamin, so sorry to inform you.
Yeah.
And he responded this way.
Yeah, so 84, he turned away from them, lamenting, alas, poor Joseph, and his eyes turned white out of grief. He suppressed. They said, by Allah, you will not cease to remember Joseph until you lose your health or even your life. He replied, I complain of my anguish and sorrow only to Allah, and I know from Allah what you don't know. Verse 87, oh, my sons, go and search diligently for Joseph and his brother, meaning Benjamin. So this is later on. I was just saying while you were away, Owen, that this is later on in the account when the brothers have returned from Egypt, and there is a difference in this story here, but they're telling him, yeah, the guy, the ruler there, which is really Joseph, and they don't know, kept Benjamin back. Okay, so they're telling him this, and then he says, look, search for Joseph and his brother, meaning Benjamin. And then also later, verse 94 to 97, when they're returning again the 3rd time, and now they're going to bring Jacob down to Egypt. When the caravan departed from Egypt, their father said to those around, you may think I'm senile, but I certainly sense the smell of Joseph. They replied, by Allah, you are definitely still in your old delusion. So the people are saying, this is your old delusion, that you think that Joseph is still alive. Okay. And in verse 96, Jacob then said to his children, did I not tell you that I truly know from Allah what you don't know? Which is what we just read a few verses earlier. They begged, oh, our father, pray for forgiveness of our sins. Okay. Right. Like they didn't have the patience like him, and the belief, of course, they were lying. Right. So, but Jacob knew that they were lying and that Joseph was still alive. You see? Okay, and now before just a couple other quick points. So go back to verse 15 here. Where was Joseph when the brothers returned home with the bloody shirt and talked with their father?
Was he still in the well?
Still in the well. They left him in the well. Then you can see the narrative picks up again in verse 19. There came some travelers. They sent their water boy who let down his bucket into the well. Oh, they found Joseph.
And that must be next day at least, not in the nighttime.
Right. traditionally, I think it's 3 days in Islamic tafsir.
So for sure, it was they returned to father.
Yeah. So they're returning. They're having the conversation with Jacob while Joseph's still in the well, left. Because remember what their plot was. Well, let's not kill him. Let's throw him in the well, and hopefully some caravan travelers are going to find him. They just know that's going to happen somehow, almost like they read Genesis or something. Okay, and so who lifts him out of the well? Not the brothers, the caravan, right? And then who sells him into slavery? Do the brothers sell him into slavery? No. They sell, the caravan takes him out of the well, they find him, and then they bring him down to Egypt and sell him into slavery for a cheap price. Okay.
So they get it for free.
Yeah, they get him for free. They bring him down to Egypt, and then they make money. That's a really great find. Right? Okay, so now we're going to do Genesis. Or do you have any questions about the narrative so far, Bolin?
Yeah.
I'm guessing you probably can already tell there's going to be a lot of differences. Okay. Do full screen. Okay, so this is Genesis 37. It is long, and so what we're going to do is we're going to read through it, the whole thing, and I tell Muslims, okay, now we're going to read, we do all of that, and it doesn't take quite so long with them because they know the narrative and Surah Yusuf well. So we can just ask them the questions. We kind of go through it pretty quickly. And then we say, okay, so now let's look at the parallel passage in the Torah. The first book of the Torah is Genesis. And the whole thing is parallel in chapter 37. The first few verses of 37 just provides context. But I think it's verse 9 is where it picks up with the exact parallel. But the context is important. So I'm going to read it, and then Olin, I'm going to ask you a question. What differences do you see at the end? Okay. So this one, we're not going to stop and analyze. We're just going to read it. So Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, which is the other name for Jacob, Israel or Jacob loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when Joseph saw that their father loved him more than all his, when his brothers saw that their father loved him, that's Joseph, more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams than for his words. Here's the parallel. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." He said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, so that's where they live, in Hebron, and he came to Shechem, that's where the brothers are. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said to him, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer." Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his fathers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our own flesh. His brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders, now pause, I'll explain this to Muslims. You're going to see that Midianites and Ishmaelites are used interchangeably for the same people. So it says, then Midianite traders passed by, and they, which would be the brothers in the context, they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Verse 29. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone. And I, where shall I go? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Okay. So I know that's a long narrative, but can you tell me off the bat, did you notice any differences?
Well, I was distracted once again, but his father rebuked him at the beginning there.
So he told him, yep. Or is it verse 10 here?
Yeah.
Right? His father
stood out to me.
So the father's reaction to the dream as he rebukes him. So is he happy or unhappy?
Unhappy.
Right. In the Qur'an, how did he respond to the dream? Did he rebuke him?
No, he didn't trust,
He didn't trust the brothers.
Right.
Right. So he actually saw this as a good thing for Joseph, because now he sees that Joseph's going to be a prophet. God, the Lord, will surely teach you the interpretation of dreams, and he's going to perfect his favor upon you, just as he did to Abraham and Isaac. Right. So this is a good thing, but just he's worried that he not tell his brothers, because Satan will use that to sow a wedge of jealousy between them. So he doesn't correct him. He doesn't harshly correct him, which is what rebuking is.
Right.
Okay. What else do you see?
The brothers throw him into the pit.
The brothers throw him into the pit. Okay. They throw him into the pit in the Quran, but is there anything about that you're thinking is different?
Again, I was distracted. My cat was.
Okay.
Determined that
Let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Okay. So beginning of Genesis 37. How old is Joseph in Genesis, verse 2?
17 years old.
17 years old. How old was he in the Quran?
It didn't really tell us, but he was younger, it seemed like.
He was a child, right?
Yeah.
So they needed to take him. The indications is that he's not mature enough to be a prophet yet, and that they need to ask for permission to take him out for him to play, and they'll definitely watch over him.
Right.
Right. In fact, in verse 22, I think it is, in the Quran that we didn't read, a couple verses later, it says that he grows up and it reaches maturity in Egypt. Okay. So he's not 17 in the Quran, where he is 17 here. Okay. We can already see that in the backstory, they're already jealous of Joseph because he's given the coat of many colors, etc. And he gives a bad report after tending to the flock with them. Now, does a child shepherd the flock?
No,
With his
makes
brother,
sense.
right? So again, he's not the story. Even the story, apart from the number that's given for his age, the story presents a Joseph that is not a child.
And also, the code of many colors were not given
Mhm.
to him, as
Yeah.
explicitly said in the Torah. In the Quran, it's not even there. Nobody will understand that it was
Right.
a special gift. It just
Right.
doesn't mention.
Right. Okay. So also there is another dream. There's two dreams in Genesis. The first dream of the sheaves of wheat, verses 5 to 8. Now, you might initially think, well, that's an omission. It's not necessarily a contradiction, okay, in the Quran. But the problem is, who does he tell the first dream to? His brothers.
Okay.
Okay. But the whole point in the Quran is he doesn't tell his dream to his brothers. Okay. So if he had already told the first dream to his brothers, it's omitted, then like it makes no sense that Jacob is warning him, don't tell your brothers or this going to, right? Because he would already, what's the point? They're already jealous because of he told them his first dream, and this dream has the same meaning as the second dream.
And
right?
who interpreted the dream in the Bible?
Yeah, who interprets the dream in Genesis?
Not the father.
It's the brothers. The brothers first interpret the dream, and they understand the meaning of the dream. They're not wrong. You're going to rule over us? You're going to reign over us? Yeah, he will. Okay, so they're not wrong. They don't need to be prophets to interpret it. Okay, plus Jacob has the same understanding. So he also understands it in Genesis, when he gets the second dream, the sun, moon, 11 stars, which is the same dream in the Quran. Now notice here in verse 9, he tells it to his brothers. Okay, and then he only tells the second dream to his brothers first. But when he told it to his fathers and his brothers, so he tells the second dream 2 times. The first time he tells the second dream, he tells it to his brothers without their father. Second time he tells the dreams with the brothers present and tells it to his father with the brothers present. And that's when Jacob rebukes him, says, what are we going to bow down, and etc. Right? So these are completely different. You see? Okay, and then the next thing in the story, the next scene in Genesis, where are the brothers? They're pasturing the flock. Let me see if I can get the map here. In here. Here we go. So here you can see the map?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't think you can see my cursor. Oh, or maybe you can.
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, so right there is Hebron. So they live kind of in the middle at the bottom of the screen. Hebron, it mentions that Jacob, the father, is going to send Joseph to go check up on the brothers who are tending to the flock up in Shechem. That's where they're supposed to be. We find out actually they're not in Shechem, but they end up in Dothan, which is even further north than Shechem. And they had left from their home base, which is Hebron. Now, if you look at the legend, that's far. Okay. It's like, I think it's like 70 or 80 kilometers, because this is also hill country. It's not flat land. So how many days journey do you think it's going to be on foot with flock through hill country to get to Shechem? 70 or 80 kilometers each way.
I sort of figured that's where you were going with this, but it would take some time. I'm not sure.
More than part of a day, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, because remember, it says that they return in the evening, implying that it's the same day in the Quran. But in Genesis, they're up tending to the flock up in Shechem. They had left from Hebron. We're going to talk about it. Let's say minimum, it's at least a few days. It could be a week each way. And then they get there, and now Jacob is in Genesis. He's wondering, where are they? They've been gone too long. So how long would they have to be gone for him to think they've been gone too long? More than twice,
Maybe months.
more than a round trip, right? So if it's a few days to a week each way, it's going to be more than double that. Okay, this is going to be a long time, maybe a couple weeks, maybe even longer.
As a matter of fact, he expects them to stay there, keep pasturing,
Right.
and Joseph will be just text message back and forth. That's it.
Yeah, I bet that they're not just going to arrive and then leave the same day or the next day. They got to
Don't just stay there.
Yeah.
Maybe they borrowed Muhammad's Barak.
They're going to have to take the sheep each way, like quickly back and forth anyway. So, okay. So the Barak is the answer to everything. But notice they're up in Dothan in Genesis, so they're even further. Okay, they're not where they're supposed to be. And you've also got to factor in, he's got to send Joseph to go find them, so you got to add in that amount of time of Joseph going out on his own to go find them up in Shechem. They're not in Shechem. He goes even further to find them in Dothan, and then they got to come home from Dothan. So this is maybe a month in total time before they get home. And so not one day or one part of a day. They're not near home.
Right.
Okay. Let me go back to... here we go. Okay, so they're up in Dothan. Now verse 18. Actually, they saw him from afar. Before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Right? In the Quran, where were they when they conspired to do whatever they were going to do to him? They ended up deciding to throw him in the well. Where were they? Not far from home.
Right.
Okay. And they decided on their plan. They were done deciding on their plan before they went to their father to request permission to take him out with them. So in the Quran, Joseph doesn't leave home alone. In fact, remember, Jacob distrusted the brothers. Mm-hmm. So he couldn't have had the idea to send Joseph on his own to go find them, to check up on them, especially he's a child in the Quran. So is he going to send a child 5 to 7, even 10 years old, into the wilderness on his own, a multiple day journey? No. Especially if he's not convinced to let them take him to, even though they're promising supervision. Definitely he can't do that. So that's why the point is, in Genesis, he's definitely not a child. He's 17. The whole story is centered around him being a young man. Okay. So they saw him, they plotted in Genesis, nowhere near home. They plotted up in Dothan. And only after Joseph had been sent by Jacob to go find them, and he arrived and he's on the edge of the field, then they're like, there he is. Now they have opportunity to do something to him because they're so far away from home. Let's kill him. How's their father ever going to know? Right? So the fact that they're so far away gives them an opportunity. And notice what they say. Here comes this dreamer. And we'll see at the end of verse 20, we'll see what will become of his dreams. So the brothers know that he's a dreamer. They know the dreams, and that's the final straw that causes them to be like, we're going to kill him. Okay, and they only do it because they have opportunity because they're so far away from home, and Jacob is nowhere around.
So the father didn't see Jacob meeting with the brothers because it's far away.
Right.
In the Quran, they take Joseph with them. The Jacob saw them living together and then coming back without Joseph.
Okay.
Therefore, they are guilty by default, and they say, well, Father, you will not believe us, but actually Joseph was killed. In the Bible, Jacob even have no idea if they met. He presumed they have to meet. But that's whole idea how these guys became opportunistic, because they said, okay, nobody knows where he is, or nobody sees us together, so let's kill him.
Mm-hmm. So then we look at the next little part. When Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life, shed no blood, throw him into the pit of the wilderness, don't lay hands on him. And then the narrator says, what's his motive? That he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So in other words, Reuben steps in, seeing that all the brothers are in on it to kill him. And he's like, don't kill him, just throw him into the pit. Because he knows he's not going to be able to convince them in the heat of the moment to stop everything and let's just bring him home. He has to stop the bloodlust, okay, and just throw him into the pit for now, and then we'll make a decision, okay? And he knows, okay, he's thinking if I can cool them down, give it time, then I can bring him home safely and they won't kill him, okay? But this is the brother in the Quran when they're plotting near home before they take Joseph away with them, who says, they come up with their initial plan, let's kill him or cast him out to some distant land. But it says one of the brothers said, don't kill him. If we're going to do something to him, let's throw him into the pit. Okay. But that's Reuben up in Dothan after Joseph is left home. Okay. And his motive here in the Genesis is to save him and bring him home. In the Quran, he's not trying to save him and bring him home. That brother is in on it. That brother wants him to go into throw him into the pit so that the caravan will take him away. Right? He does preserve his life so he doesn't die, but his intent isn't to bring him home to his father, which is what it says here. Right? So the motive is completely different. The timing is completely different. The location is completely different. The order of events is completely different. Okay, and they threw him into the well.
I want to add a few cents here. Then in the Quran, a brother said, Joseph and his brother more beloved to the Father than us. Therefore, let's kill both of them. No, let's kill one of them, and the Father will love us. It's not even logical.
Yeah, the Quran doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
because they haven't dealt with the problem with Benjamin, the brother.
Yeah.
Right. So
it
doesn't make any sense.
The motive to kill him only to take over the person who Father loved the most. They say he two brothers beloved to the Father. Right. So ideally, you kill the both. But I mean, how many families do you know they're killing siblings because Father loved them more? Because they're the youngest ones, right? So the oldest brother will do such thing for just simply jealousy of we're not loved anymore because we're 30 years old and he's, let's say, 5. So it doesn't make sense to have vendetta against one brother when 2 brothers are beloved. It's not going to solve the problem. The father will love the Benjamin.
And actually, more. Benjamin should be younger.
Way younger, 1 year.
It could be an infant or something. Yeah. Okay. So also notice they throw him into the pit, and it says there's no water in it. Okay, but in the Quran, when the caravan comes and sends their water boy down to fetch water from the well, it's clearly implying there's water in it. Okay. Likewise, notice the next part, verses 25 to 28. It says, then they sat down to eat and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with camels bearing all this stuff, okay, bring it down to Egypt. And Judah, so another brother that's named, says, what profit is if we kill him and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Okay, so I think actually what the Quran is doing is actually mixing these two characters, Judah and Reuben, because he's also saying, let's not kill him. So did Reuben. But this brother is in on it and wants him sent off to a distant land, right? You'll also notice that the whole plan was decided in the Quran at one time. It was decided, there was no change of plans. Here, there's a change of plans, right? So now they decide they sell him to the Ishmaelites. So the brothers sell him. They sell him into slavery. Okay, let's go faster. So then Reuben comes back, and doesn't say where Reuben was, but if you think about the context, they're up tending to the flock. So he's probably over some hillside somewhere, tending to the flock out of sight, long enough that they see a caravan coming by and they sell him before Reuben comes back. So Reuben, the point though is that Reuben comes back and he's already sold. So where were the brothers when Joseph was sold? They were still up in Dothan. They weren't back home talking to their father, presenting the bloody shirt. Okay. So then they come and they present the bloody shirt. Joseph's already sold and on his way down to Egypt. Okay. And they say, look at how it phrases it here. They sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. Now, this is actually clever of them, because in Genesis, if you think about the circumstances, the brothers were so far away from home, even from Jacob's perspective, that they went up to Shechem. He doesn't know they went all the way to Dothan. But gone so long, he sent Joseph on his own to go find them. So does Jacob know that Joseph even found them? No. All they're saying, we found this robe of many colors. Is it Joseph's? Right? Meaning they're not acknowledging that they even met. They're just saying, basically, probably coming home, they stumbled upon his robe, bloodied up, and what happened? Why is the robe there? Why is Joseph's robe there, essentially? They're not trying to convince him it's Joseph's robe explicitly, right? They're not saying whose robe it is. Right. And you're not going to believe us no matter what we say. And that's what the Quran says. They come with fake tears. Here they're not crying. Okay? And they're trying to convince him it's Joseph's robe. Whereas in Genesis, they're not trying to convince him. They're letting him draw the conclusion himself. And they're not suggesting at all any responsibility, because he was never, here's the key thing, he was never in their custody. Right? But in the Quran, he was always in their custody, because they left home with him, promising to supervise him. So therefore, they're at fault for whatever happens to him. Here, Joseph probably never found them, and so he was never in their custody, in which case they have no responsibility. Okay, that's why it made so much sense with them coming up with the plan so far away that they can get away with it. Okay, then so it says he identified it and said, it is my son's robe, a fierce animal has devoured him. So this is a point of fact from the point of Jacob. He's concluded he's been eaten by an animal. Notice the next phrase, Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. So we showed in the Quran, definitely he thinks he's alive. But if a Muslim is going to push back somehow and reinterpret those verses, well, maybe he's not, maybe we don't know it, maybe it's not saying he thinks he's alive. Does he have any doubt about Joseph's death in the Quran? In the Quran, he has.
In the Quran.
He must have doubt. Must at least have doubt. Here, he is without doubt torn to pieces. It's amazing how it phrases it. Then Jacob tore his garments, put on sackcloth. All his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him. He refused to be comforted. He says, I'm going to go down to the realm of the dead, Sheol, mourning. So total opposite description as in the Quran, where he says, no, you're trying to trick me. You did something bad. Right? So, do you want to, maybe we should replay that. I think I have it loaded up, the clip of Yasser Qadi. Okay.
Yeah, do you want me to play it after I show the short version, repeating some of the points?
Yeah, why don't you do that? So Alex, what he's going to do is he's going to do a bit of a short presentation of a shortened version of the material.
Okay.
That he would normally do, like in a street conversation. So yeah, take it away.
And that will probably reinforce some points you, Greg, already mentioned.
Yeah.
So it's like you're gonna hear a second time. All right. So let me
share screen.
Let me share
the presentation.
My screen. Yeah. I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay.
Here it is.
So now I'm gonna show you a short version, as I do usually on the street. So there's a second part of the story usually I go to, because I try to spend as little time as possible, but make the strongest point as possible in order to move forward, because you don't know at what time a Muslim friend will say, "Oh, I have to go. I'm sorry, I don't have time anymore." Right?
Yeah.
So therefore, basically, I'm going into that Surah 12, 16 to 18. They return to the father in the evening, weeping, and they said, "We'll devour him, but you will not believe us." His response, "No, you liars. I know Joseph is alive." So, and then I bring the Genesis 37, 32 to 35, exactly what just Greg said. And it's basically, if I will highlight the issue so we can see, they denied to seeing Joseph at all. They basically asked father to identify the robe. He said he identified, and he said Joseph without doubt torn to pieces. And he started mourning for his son many days, and his father wept for him. So it basically goes against what the Quran said. It's completely opposite story, right? According to the Quran, brothers told their father that Joseph was dead, and his father accused the brothers of lying. Well, according to the Torah, the brothers didn't tell their father that Joseph was killed. Jacob concluded on his own accord was just that Joseph was dead. And of course, my favorite part is that brothers were crying about Joseph. That means not their father. In the Torah, it's opposite. It's Joseph's father cried over his dead. Brothers didn't cry and weren't successfully trying to comfort him. So we have two conflicting reports. So in the Quran, they're crying. In the Torah, he's crying. They're not crying. And in the Quran, he's not crying. He's just dismissing the report. So we have two completely opposite stories. And again, as I said, we go back to the future, and we go to this moment when Joseph presents himself to the brothers, and you reunite with them again. And that's Surah 12, 94 to 96. And basically, it said like the caravan departed from Egypt, right? And he said, I smell of Joseph, right? So in the Torah, it's quite differently. So they coming to the father and saying, Joseph is still alive, and he's ruler over all the land of Egypt. And now, very important, and his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. That's drastic contradiction from a Quranic passage, when he always knew for 20 plus years. He knew in the Quran that Joseph was alive. In the Torah, for 23 years, he was sure absolutely that Joseph was dead. Therefore, he didn't believe the first report about Joseph being alive. But then they told him all the words of Joseph, which he has said to them. And then he saw the baggage that Joseph had sent to carry him. The spirit of Jacob, their father, revived. And Israel said, "It's enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I'll go and see him before I die." So it's like a really opposite reaction from the biblical Quranic perspective.
I love your pictures. They're so fun.
I find the pictures, I feel like amazingly, right? So they just show exactly the emotions. So Here's the Quran. He said, "Didn't I not tell you 20 years ago that I know from Allah which you don't know?" Meaning Joseph was alive. In the Torah, his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. So that's what we have. And we're comparing the stories. And now I want to show you like the long version, which is like Greg is contributing a lot. Then he started going through every single detail. So if we look through for all the story of Genesis 37 compared with the corresponding verse from the Quran, from Surah of some verse 4, excluded verse 7, we could see how many differences so far we have. All right, and then you go to the very back to the end of the short is 108 differences from ayah 4 to 18 minus verse 7. So we have 108 differences in less than in 14 verses in the Quran, which is very high. The Muhammad couldn't pass the exam for sure. And now I want to play the Yasser Qadir.
Yeah, what we started with.
Yeah.
And the Quranic story is so similar to the narrative to this day in the Old Testament that it is amazing.
See, I played a very short clip. So definitely a lot of Muslims, they don't know what the story we're about to tell them.
So,
therefore, they've been caught by surprise. And that's what I do. Like it's like years ago, I published a book, Quran Bible Comparison, very briefly explaining the most obvious differences. But now we're going through and we're going to find out thousands of differences. Now, my estimate so far, in 97 verses of the Surah 12 about Joseph, there'll be over 800 differences by the end.
Yeah, I'm going through analyzing it right now, and I'm over 300 so far.
And you're not in the middle yet.
Maybe not even halfway, maybe.
Yeah, not even halfway. So my estimate will be from Adam, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses. There will be over 2,000 differences. Mm-hmm. Therefore, my conclusion is, and you remember how many verses I said Quran used to speak about this, retelling the stories? 987. So, and I think it will be way more than 2,000.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm saying that the Torah is an elephant in the mosque. Everybody tries to avoid looking at it, but it's inevitable. You have to face it. We will make sure the Muslims will face it. So therefore, the second pillar, which is God revealed the Torah and the Quran, it goes crumbling down when the Torah comes in and shouted them. Another picture I like to show is basically Titanic. It's inevitable. The Torah, meaning the Quran, it sink the Quran, and it sink the Islam. So this can, at this point, I stop my short presentation.
Yeah, maybe we can, or you want to say something, Olin?
Well, I was just wondering about the differences. Are they major differences, minor differences, or?
Yeah, and so let's talk about that. First, let me play a couple, the first two videos that are, we probably actually play all three that I have listed there, but if you want to play the first one, and we'll comment on that.
Okay.
Note, first and foremost, I remind you of the principle again. The Quran has a brief way of telling the story. So if Allah mentions a detail, then that detail becomes strategically important, not just for the story to move forward, but for us to learn something from it. So,
okay, so he said, in the Quran, any detail in the Quran is strategically important. This is not just his opinion. This is everybody's opinion among Muslims, that every detail in the Quran matters. Now, what a Muslim will try to say, they might say it at this point once you start comparing the details in a narrative, or they're going to say it at the end. Okay, we want to unpack this with you and think through just the role this plays in the argumentation. But normally we were not going to have a long conversation at this point with a Muslim about entertaining objections. But sometimes they'll say something like, oh, but those are just the details. The details don't matter. Okay? Like they're minor differences that don't matter. Okay? But what did we say at the outset? from the first pillar, Surah 12, verse 111, that in their stories, the stories of the prophets, there's a lesson for people of reason that this message, the Quran, cannot be a fabrication. Rather, it's a confirmation of previous revelation, a detailed explanation of all things. And you remember what I said, the analogy, this is like because Muhammad didn't have access to the Hebrew scriptures, he couldn't read the text himself, he could only know it potentially orally. So if we use an analogy of somebody like a Christian who, like a Christian kid who grows up in a Christian family who hears the stories, Bible stories, but isn't old enough to read the Bible himself, and he tells you the story of Noah in a very summarized general fashion. God told Noah to build an ark because he's sending a flood to destroy the world because the world was corrupt. And he had two by two animals went on the ark. If he tells you that amount of information, you're not going to walk away thinking, oh, he must have got it directly from God, or he must have read the text. No, he probably heard the story orally. So the claim of the Quran is not merely that he's giving a general account. It has to be that he's giving a significant amount of information and that he's giving details, specific information that he couldn't have just picked up orally, right? Or that and certainly the presumption behind it is that people know that he doesn't have access to the text. So the fact that he gives 97 verses of a narrative of Joseph in this one chapter, from verse 4 to 101, verse 7 is excluded because it's not part of this narrative, that 97 verses, almost 100 verses long of narrative, that's a lot of detail, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
this is like one of the only stories in the Quran that gives us some kind of context.
That's in one place, but
Right.
there are all the other stories have lots of detail. Okay. It's just that it doesn't tell you all the stories about each character that it's talking about from the Bible, but it does give information. And so what you would expect based on the Quran's claim is that whatever information it's giving that's parallel with the biblical accounts is going to be corroborated. That's the claim. 1094, if you're in doubt about these stories, then go ask the people who've been reading the scripture before you. Or 12:111, right? The stories of the prophets are confirmation.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's in the detail that matters. If let me reread that quote from the Study Quran. It's a good question that you brought up, so we dig into it, because this is at the kind of core of our approach. So he comments on Surah 11, verse 49, which is, again, it's saying you didn't know these stories. You meaning Muhammad and the Arabs. And it's talking about the story of Noah in chapter 11. And this is understood to mean that the prophet did not know such accounts as the story of came to him, being known to the people of Mecca at the time, since they were not people of the book, so they didn't have scripture. However, in Mecca during the lifetime of the prophet, it is more likely that this version of such stories, rather than a lack of general knowledge of them.
You were breaking up a little bit. I'm not sure how that came through.
I'm having unstable connection.
Yeah. It looks like they both left me now. We'll give them just a few minutes here. Here comes Alex back. Maybe. All right.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. Did we lose Alex too?
He had kind of closed out his screen there before you started breaking up, so I'm not sure what happened.
Sorry. So I was reading a quote from the study Qur'an. So did you get the quote? So in other words, he's saying it's more likely that it refers to a lack of knowledge about the details and spiritual meaning of such stories rather than a lack of general knowledge of them. Mm-hmm. So the point is, the claim of the Quran is that Muhammad couldn't know this information because how could he know all this detail in the amount of information he does about the stories, right, and get it all right? You can't say, oh, it must be a revelation of God because he's got lots of information and all of it, and so much of it is wrong. Okay, that's not from God. God doesn't make mistakes. So if he's the author of the original Torah and the Quran, which is the claim is, and what we presented already is that the Quran affirms the Torah in the time of Muhammad. So now we can compare it. What it's claiming is that the information should be corroborated. Anything that could be checked, meaning if there's parallels in the stories and it can be checked, then it should be corroborated. Not at least not contradicted, right?
Right.
So if it has information in the Quran, it's whatever information is given in the Quran in the stories, that's what matters. Because it's claiming that's from God. So for you, like when you raise the question, well, is this minor or major issue or minor issue? Well, in one sense, it is very minor, and actually that's why it's more powerful. Because major things are theological things, right? And that's what Christians and Jews keep wanting to talk about, or Christians and Muslims keep wanting to talk about, because they think, oh, well, that's the stuff that matters. Our point is, this stuff doesn't matter. So why is it different? Why is the Quran giving a contradictory account in details that don't matter? Because if they don't matter, then the Jews didn't change it. Right?
Right.
If it's theological in nature or ethical in nature or something about Muhammad, like a prophecy of Muhammad that was supposedly in the Torah that the Quran claims, there you could have hypothetical motives to change it. Right? Even though we're going to say, manuscript-wise, we didn't see, whatever, put that aside.
Yeah.
Because we're not concerned with what Christians think. We're only concerned with what Muslims think and what would be persuasive to them. So they're going to hold on with whatever they can as long as they can think of a hypothetical explanation, even if it's without any evidence. Because they think that the Quran is enough evidence on its own. So as long as they can come up with a hypothetical explanation, then they're going to hold on to the Quran. But our point is there is no hypothetical explanation for the details. So if they're going to push back, which most of the time they're going to try to push back, right? What are they going to do at this point or later down the line after we shared more stories that are different? You tell me, Olin, what are they going to do?
They're going to tell you your Bible's corrupted.
Okay. Even though we established in the first pillar that we're not talking about Bible in general, we're just talking about Torah, that the Torah is uncorrupted in the time of Muhammad and reliable. Okay, so what they're not going to do, they almost never do, is push back and say, oh, well, the verses that we went through together, I'm going to backtrack on that and I'm going to give you a different interpretation. Mm-hmm. They almost never do that. Okay. Now, what they may try to do is bring up something that wasn't brought up in the presentation, in that part of the conversation. So if I went through it more quickly and I skipped over things, like if we didn't talk about Surah 279, that they write the book with their own hands saying that it's from Allah, and I haven't rebutted that point, they may bring it up. Okay. And then I'm going to have to rebut it, which is fine.
I guess. Yeah.
It doesn't establish that there's any change. All it's saying is that they wrote a book in the context, in the time of Muhammad. Okay. So that's fine. Writing a book doesn't change the existing book. Okay. It doesn't say they changed it. It says they wrote a book in the time of Muhammad, in the context. So it doesn't say, and the rest of the Quran is saying that it's reliable and authoritative for the Jewish people in the kind of time Muhammad. So, and you can go ask them about the stories and they'll tell you that it's so. So the point is, the details matter. So like one of the sayings that we said before, I think in the first session, is that we focus on details, not doctrine. Okay. It's the things that are so insignificant that are actually the most significant. Okay. And this is the strategic misstep we would say Christians are taking by focusing on the things that they think are more important because it helps them share the gospel more quickly, right? We share the gospel. We just take more time because we realize there is so much ground we have to like till the soil first by deconstructing the Qur'an. Like, you know, we use the analogy of the bulldozer removing the pillars. You got to move those out of the way to reconstruct again new pillars, okay, which is also Old Testament, before we even get to the gospel. Because if we do it too quickly, we can't, it's like not having a proper foundation, like Jesus said, right? It's like trying to build it on sand instead of on the rock. So we want to build it on the rock. We want to do it the proper way. So to do it the proper way, we have to show them that there is no reasonable explanation whatsoever for their position. Because, like, think about what we went through with just this story that we compared. And just think about the specifics. So if they're going to come back and they're going to say, oh, the Torah must have been corrupted. Okay. And we're not going to get into arguments about the first pillar and all the verses in the Quran about the Torah. Okay. That's like, okay, fine. So you think it was corrupted. Okay. So you think it was corrupted. So now we need you to explain to us every specific detail in the narrative and give an accounting for it. Explain to us why the Jews changed it. And also when, and give us some evidence.
So 108 differences so far in that short story.
Yeah, so 108 differences just in the parallel part that we looked at.
Do you think they know about these differences? Maybe a few. Like they will remember a few differences, but
maybe they didn't sell them into slavery. That might be one they know.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the story, they know the Quranic version of the story. They don't know the biblical version. Even their apologists don't know this stuff much. Okay, so there are like maybe a couple that might know the story, but certainly not to the extent that we've been analyzing it. And they're not looking at it through this angle because, you know, Muslims respond to the arguments that they're given. So they're not responding to these issues because nobody's bringing it up. Right? So all that they'll be able to do is they'll try to say that, well, it must have been corrupted, and then we're going to say, okay, so explain, why did the Jews change Joseph's age? Okay, so that's one detail. Let's just think about that.
Right.
So if he was 5 to 7 or 5 to 10 years old, whatever, in the Quran, he was a child in the Quran. He wasn't 17. Okay. So that means, according to them, the original Torah told it the way the Quran told it. And the Jews changed it so that Genesis now is in the form we have it, which is where he's 17 now. So originally Genesis, according to the Islamic claim of corruption, Joseph was 5 to 7, 5 to 10 years old, and then they changed it at some point, presumably before the Dead Sea Scrolls. And even though we established the unbreakable chain, that there's no possible way for corruption in the Islamic narrative from Moses to Jesus. Okay, that aside. Okay. So even like they had nothing to stand on, but now they're just going to be special pleading. And they're going to say, okay, well, they must have changed it. Can you even give me a hypothetical explanation? Even without the evidence, give me a hypothetical explanation. So what we come down to, was it an intentional change or an unintentional change? So let's think about it. Could it have been unintentional? Like they accidentally, a copyist mistakenly copied a couple lines or something.
Too many things depends on the story.
Too many things depends on his age in the story, right? Because not only it doesn't give the number for the years, 17 in verse 2, But it says that he was pasturing the flock with his brothers. It says that Jacob had the idea to send Joseph on his own, a multiple-day journey out in the wilderness alone, to go find his brothers to check up on them. All of that means he wasn't a child in Genesis, as we have it now, right? And so why would the Jews change the story from a child to that? They're going to have to change so much of the story, one, because all the details are related
Right.
to this. So the whole structure of the narrative is built on this.
I just wonder if the original Torah, the Quranic Torah, contained the name of the place, like Hebron, or the name of the brother, Benjamin. Quran doesn't have a name of the brother. It doesn't give us the place when then Jacob and his sons lived. So somehow, if God give that knowledge to Moses as the original Torah, then should be no names mentioned. So the Jews invented all story, including names of every brother, story behind every brother.
Well, I mean, they can say, well, you know, that maybe some of that information is correct. That's preserved in the Torah, which they use to fill in the gaps in the Quran, right? Anyway, when they try to explain
the gaps, I mean,
but
there's no way.
No, I know, I understand that, but I'm just like, if you're saying names and stuff, they can say, well, okay, maybe that's not included, but the problem is that actually that information is very crucial to understand the story, even in the Quran. Because why are the brothers upset? Why are they jealous about Joseph and his?
Did we find this story in any other source outside of the Bible or the Quran? Do you know?
The Joseph story?
Yes. Like the Abraham stories.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty well documented that it's borrowed from.
We have it. Sorry, say that again.
I was just wondering if this story of Joseph is found somewhere else other than the Quran or the Bible. Is there like a source that maybe they're borrowing from that would account for some of these differences?
That the Quran is borrowing from?
Yeah.
To the Quran or the Bible? Okay, the Quran. Okay.
No, the Quran borrows story.
Yeah, definitely it's borrowing from various legends.
Not to the extent of being so different.
Okay.
The Midrash is based on the Torah, and Jews exploded into enormous proportion, but there's still the skeleton of the Midrash is still Torah. When we see in the Quran, skeleton is different. It's different animal altogether.
Okay.
So that's why I don't know when Muhammad came with all these details. There is no way I couldn't find it yet. I mean, maybe there is something else we don't know.
Yeah.
But
what's interesting is the Quran is omitting many details that are in the Genesis account. It includes extra information and details that are not in Genesis that are in Jewish legends. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and some of it is he just gets it wrong when it's just like, let's say it's not in Midrash, but it's just Genesis. He's retelling the story in the wrong way. Like he tells it in the wrong way. It's distorted. Maybe because it's oral, like there are different explanations for it, but basically one is that bad memory. So he heard it and he's retelling it incorrectly because he didn't remember it perfectly well. Another is that, the Jews the rabbis in his time were intentionally feeding him information and telling him the stories in an intentionally distorted way. And the reason for this, and I think it's very clear that they did this, and we see evidence in certain accounts that there's no way it's just bad memory and oral, but it's definitely intentional distortion, that nobody would ever make those mistakes. And only people who actually know the real accounts would mix stories together and intentionally distort it the way that it is in the Quran. So we do think that there's an intentional distortion being through people that are influencing probably Muhammad behind the Quran. And so that's a part of it. And another is probably Muhammad or his supporters who were deceiving him to, let's say, rabbinical supporters who were in his movement distorting the stories. Either Muhammad intentionally distorted them to make the prophets look like him in the stories, because all the prophets like Noah and Abraham and everybody looks like Muhammad in the Quran. Okay, the way that each of the stories are told, like he goes to the leaders of his people, the leaders reject him, the people are idolaters, and he calls them to repent. And he first, he first preaches privately and then he preaches, publicly. Okay, like in the Noah story, this is the same thing in the life of Muhammad. So the life of Muhammad is the framework for how the stories of the prophets in the Quran are told. So you could explain that basically one of two ways, is that either Muhammad reshaped the stories himself and orally told them, and his helpers wrote it down in that way with his mind behind it, or it's the rabbinical influences distorting the stories also to make them look like Muhammad, because they want him to believe that he is a prophet. Okay, so they retell the stories to make it look like him. So like, there's different ways that we can speculate about it and possible explanations. Yeah.
And one more thing is very important. For that kind of approach we're taking, we need that the Quran is perfectly preserved.
Yeah.
This means all the mistakes we find in today's Quran and in Arabic and all translations, it actually goes back straight to Muhammad's I don't know, mind, mouth, whatever you said, right? So it's linked with him. So it's not like we cannot. I don't want Muslims to say, well, I think it was original Quran, but then was distorted. That's why it's so bad. So I want them to say, yes, it was exactly like this from mouth of Muhammad, and it means Muhammad was the author of the Quran, and Muhammad was being taught by the Jews.
Yeah, maybe not the writer of the Quran, but the one who's telling the verses, and then his helpers are writing it down.
He's reciting the Quran.
Yeah,
but
so
somebody fed them information.
Right. And I would say that when you look at the stories, it's also proof that it was authored in the time of Muhammad, not later. Because there's no way you would get these stories this wrong.
Okay.
And this is just one example, but the way the stories, some of the other stories we'll share other times, are so messed up in their telling. There's no possible way anybody could get this wrong if they had access to books, right? If they were more knowledgeable and scholarly, or they had, and they were intentionally fabricating a scripture, right? So I don't think it was being intentionally fabricated on the part of Muhammad, and now may have been intentionally fabricated on the part of people influencing him, but he, I think, was susceptible to the influence of others who he thought were being honest with him, but were not being honest with him. And that's the only explanation that, and it puts it in his time, rather than like a century later, like someone like Jay would argue, or skeptical Western scholars are going to say it wasn't from the time of Muhammad. We don't agree with that, because there's no way that you would have the stories develop like this in a later period with wealthy politicians and leadership who have access to resources and scholars and books, and that can if it was a conspiracy to put together a book that was a fabrication, right? Whereas if it's from the mind of, essentially, if it's from relaying from the mind of an illiterate man, it makes a lot of sense.
And also, if we're going to go later on in the story of Joseph, we actually highlight issues. Then we could see how Muhammad making advance in the storytelling, and then he remembers suddenly that he missed something, and he adds in detail, which is also could be cross-reference with the Bible or Midrash, but now it's in the wrong place because he already said something beforehand that he forgot to mention it. And it's so obvious
Yeah, just
Why this-
why don't you just explain the example of I think it's Simeon in the first trip.
Yeah, we know in the Torah, the first trip when brothers was actually sent to prison.
So
for 3 days.
the brothers go from Canaan down to Egypt, the first trip to get food.
Yeah,
Right.
and they've been
During the
accused
famine.
by Joseph to be spies. He sent them to prison. He said one will go back to father, bring the Benjamin. The 9 will stay in the prison. 3 days later, he changed his mind. He said, 1 stay, 9 go. And Simeon was taken as a hostage. Yeah. Brothers coming back to father saying, Simeon is taken. We have our gold back, silver back. We're all afraid. What's going on? We need to take Simeon back, but we need Benjamin. Father denied it. He said, no, I won't give you Benjamin for Simeon. I love Benjamin after Joseph died. I mean, Benjamin, the next beloved to me. Okay. And then eventually, when the time came when they are starving again, he said, my sons go back to Egypt to buy food. And Reuben and then Judah said, we can't go without Benjamin. Sorry. And eventually he reluctantly agreed to send Benjamin with him. So, and then they go back and they reunite with the Simeon. That's the story. The Simeon was being freed from prison when they came second time to Egypt. If we read the Quranic passage, the first visit of brothers in Egypt, very short, half verse. Muhammad didn't elaborate anything about details, right? But when it comes to the second visit, he suddenly remembers then one brother was kept in somewhere in Egypt, and he didn't come back to father. And he, by accident, well, without knowledge, he said it was an elderly brother, I think.
The eldest brother.
Who said on his own volition, he said, I will stay in Egypt, then you go to father and saying, Benjamin is taken hostage.
Yeah. So in other words, when the Quran tells the story, the first time the brothers come down to Egypt, which is supposed to, if it fit with Genesis, Joseph is supposed to be pretend like he's a hard ruler and suspects they're being spies, which is not how he is in the Quran. He's the most generous host, and even gives them all their money back, which is all a positive thing in the Quran. They discover their money when they get home, and they think, oh, what? We got all our money. We can go back and buy even more food, and they're happy. Whereas in Genesis, they're shocked, because they were just accused of being spies, and now they have all of their money back with them. There's no way they can go back because, they're basically thieves as well. And on the first trip in the Quran, not only is he nice to them, he doesn't hold anyone hostage. So Simeon isn't held hostage in the Quran on the first trip like he is in Genesis. So Muhammad seemed to have forgot that element in the story when he's telling the first trip. And then he sort of seems to remember it. And then so he makes up for it by putting him on the second trip. There's a hostage. But then it's the wrong brother because it's the eldest brother, he says, in the Quran. But Simeon's not the eldest brother. So it's the wrong brother. And there's even other layers to this. But that means there needs to be a third trip in the Quran. So he adds a third time, going back and coming back again down to Egypt, whereas in Genesis, they only do it twice. So because he messed up the retelling of the first trip, he had to add it in the second, and then that forces him to have a third trip.
So there's no way it could be done. This Quran could be done by the group of body of scholars who know the Bible.
Oh, maybe you want to read the Gates part because it ties in with the number of trips that we're talking about. Alex?
Yeah, let me see.
Maybe I'll pull up. I'll share my screen with the verse.
Okay.
Okay. It's verse, what is it, 67, 68? So same surah, because we're talking about Joseph. Okay, so
Yeah.
you can see here.
So that's the second trip. Before second trip, he said, he instructed them, "O my sons, do not enter the city all through one gate, but through separate gates." And 68, they entered as their father was instructed them. This did not help them against the will of Allah. And then we read about Benjamin's cup. I mean, the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, right? That's the trip. Second.
Yeah, so they go back down to Egypt, and then the whole thing with Benjamin.
Yeah. So when we, first of all, we don't have anything in the Torah speaking about instruction like this. Don't enter the city from one gate, and it's kind of, strange. Where does Islam, the Quran, or Muhammad took the information from? Well, we find it in the Midrash. It's Jewish legends. But it was the first trip. Before the first trip, Jacob tell his sons, don't enter through the same gate, or even be visible together. Like don't even walk together as a group, because the Egyptians might cast an evil eye on you. So that makes it's all wrong, and we don't have superstitions in the Bible anywhere. But the Jews believe in superstitions, and as well as Muslims believe in that, right? And but at least this midrash is being completely wrong. But yet he's more logical, because father told his sons before, like, don't go to the same gate, so evil eye will not be cast on you. Before the first three.
Yeah, I can share it because I've got it pulled up for.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can keep talking.
Yeah, but Muhammad forgot about it, and he included it before the second trip, which was already too late. If the evil eye been cast on them, that was months ago or a week before, when the first time entered. So it's kind of too late to advise them. In the Midrash, it's a correct position. It's logically correct. It's wrong biblically, but it's logically it's correct. That's what we see, right? And as he knew that it will likely to attract attention on account of their heroic stature and handsome appearance, he cautioned them against going to the city altogether through the same gate, or indeed showing themselves altogether anywhere in public, that the evil eye not cast upon them. So this is the first trip. Again, Muhammad forgot about it, and he used it for the second trip. So that indication is give us indication that Muhammad simply forgot, and then he remembered, and he just added in the wrong position. That's why you need the third trip of brothers going to Egypt, and that's actually very very bizarre, because we know the reason why Joseph revealed himself to his brothers in the Bible, in the Torah, simply because when he said, Benjamin found guilty, he will stay as my slave. Everybody free to go. No worries. Go home. You've done nothing wrong. But then Judah said, we cannot go home without Benjamin, because when father will knew about Benjamin as a slave, he will die. Like, I cannot bring them this news. Like, he will die instantly. Basically, that's what he said. Like, he will not be able to bear the news of his second beloved son after Joseph. He also perished in Egypt. No, he's not dead, but he's a slave, and he's not coming home. So Judah said, I will never go back. I'd rather stay here, and Benjamin must go back to his father. I stay in his place. That's why the moment Joseph realized he's dead serious, I mean, Judah is dead serious, then he revealed himself. So in the Quran, it's like nothing special. The elder brother saying, well, Benjamin is taken. Well, there's no name. There's no name Benjamin mentioned, but we use the name, right? So Benjamin is taken as a prisoner, and I will stay in Egypt for whatever reason. There's no reason why he has to stay in Egypt. And you go back to father and tell him that your son Benjamin has he is a thief. And they coming back to father and saying, Father, I'm sorry, but Benjamin has stolen, and therefore he's in prison. And father said, I don't believe you. And then he said, oh, like, go back and, oh, my Joseph, and you go back again and find Joseph and his brother. Like, he would have been dead in Genesis if he was just knew the story of Benjamin is taken from him, and he's in Egypt forever as a slave. So this meeting is impossible to have. Like, the brothers will not come to Jacob saying Benjamin is staying in Egypt forever as a slave because he has stolen. He never knew that story in the Bible. Bible is completely different story. And as a matter of fact, in Midrash, it's, as I said, it's basically using the structure of the Torah and put wrong stuff around it, but nevertheless, it's based on the Torah. The Quran, on the other hand, it doesn't based on the Torah. It's based on some Midrashic account, something from the Torah what he heard. He mixed up everything, or most of the stuff. He made them in the wrong places. He just missed the time and dates and place and names and everything. And it became even illogical to see the way. We have another one story, which I don't know, should we go with the democratic pharaoh or not, which is like a very ridiculous story by itself. But nevertheless, the story of Joseph is saturated with all this information, which is really wrong.
I say we do it to close it off.
You want to do it?
I know you love doing it, Alex. So. Let me just.
It's another story from, but early in the story of Joseph. Then Joseph went to prison.
What's the verse? It is. Oh yeah, it's
47.
It's when he says, "Bring him," right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's 50,
what it said this
50.
was funny. Like, it's 43.
Oh,
That's
43.
43.
No, 43 is 43 is when the king, which is we call Pharaoh, he's called the king in the Quran. So the king has his dream in 43.
Mm-hmm. And
46 to 49.
First, I have to say
Pharaoh
something.
goes to the prison.
Let me go and say,
Go
like,
ahead.
45. It said, finally, the surviving ex-prisoner remembered Joseph after a long time and said to king, I will tell you interpretation, so send me forth to Joseph. It's not in the Arabic. So he might say, let me go somewhere, I'll bring back information.
Yeah, send me away, let me go.
Oh, let me go. And then he's going to Joseph. Joseph in the prison, the cupbearer, supposedly, meeting Joseph, and he said, oh, Joseph, oh man of truth. Like nothing happened for so many years. And then he forgot about him, right? Interpret for us the dreams. And Joseph, being in prison, interpreting dreams to the cupbearer. And that cupbearer gets some information and going back to Pharaoh, and Joseph's still in the prison. And he tells the Pharaoh all of what the dream is about. And in the verse 50, it said, the king then said, bring him to me. When the messenger came to him, Joseph said, go back to your master and ask him about the case of the woman who cut their hands. Surely my Lord has full knowledge of their cunning. The king asked the woman, what did you get? And eventually, it's a bizarre story because it's never happened. Cutting hands, it's another fake story which is created by the rabbis.
The Midrash,
to make like colorful story of the Zuleika trying to seduce Joseph and so on. But here's what's very interesting. King saying, like, it's all wrong, it's all messed up story when we bring the Bible. But he said, bring him to me. And he sent whatever guy, like he's a servant, to pick up Joseph from a prison to see the king. And Joseph said, I'm not coming. Now, in every century, in every millennium, if the servant of the ruler will come to execute the will of the ruler, and person refused to cooperate, what would have happened to this guy? The servant will take him, muzzle his mouth, put him in chains, and bring him back to his master, because that was the order from the king. King said, bring him to me, clear cut. But suddenly, this servant lost his mind. He's coming back to his king, and he said, Joseph, this prisoner doesn't want to go. As a matter of fact, he just give you an ultimatum. You must find a woman who did something funny, who cut their hands, and you have to investigate the case. And this another thing's happening. Second impossible things happens. Instead of the king or the pharaoh or whatever immediately killing the servant and sending another servant who will be more sensible, who has the most common sense, and bring Joseph to him, because that's initial response, right? Bring Joseph, bring him to me. He said, oh, okay, you know what, you're right, Joseph is right, like, let me ask a woman. So he sent many servants to reach out all these women who years ago cut their hands by seeing Joseph, and then waited until they finally dressed themselves appropriately. They all come to him, and he asked him a question, and he gave a good answer. And finally he said, okay, Joseph is clear, he's done nothing wrong. And basically he's basically asking Joseph, could you please come? And Joseph said, okay, fine, all right, I'll go, I'll see you. So finally Joseph complied. When we talked to one Muslim imam, and we asked, like, what's going on with what kind of king is that? How anybody can do that in any century? And he said maybe the king was democratic, or it was democratic pharaoh. And he was like smiling when he was saying that. It's a bizarre story. There's nobody's acting like what is said in the Quran.
Prisoners in ancient Egypt had a lot of human rights that were respected.
Yeah.
But when you read the biblical account, can you pull the Bible?
Yeah, I have it.
Because it's so clear. It's so clear cut. It's just demolish entire narrative of the Quran and make him null and void, regardless of illogical account whether Muhammad give it to us. So here's and Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And then he has shaved himself and changed his clothes. He came in before Pharaoh. So it's interesting enough, there's a word quickly right there.
Yeah, I checked the Hebrew actually. I checked the Hebrew, and it's hurriedly. Like it's saying they hurried. They hurriedly brought him.
The king request.
Yeah.
Did we see that Joseph said, I'm not coming? No. Of course not.
Wait till go back to him and tell him he has to like investigate the case, why he put in prison.
He's like so many years in prison. He asked cupbearer to remind about that issue of his imprisonment before Pharaoh. And when actually it happens, and Pharaoh said, you have to come, and he has no idea why Pharaoh summoned him. In the Quran, he already told her, he heard the dream, he gave an explanation. It's all messed up in the Quran.
Yeah, in fact, this whole section is the cupbearer remembering. I remember my offenses today because he just heard Pharaoh tell his dream to his magicians and wise men, and nobody can interpret it. And the cupbearer is like, oh, this is 2 years after he's been left in prison. Okay. He's like, I remember my offenses. Now he's telling Pharaoh, I remember my offenses. I remember that when you were angry with me and sent me to prison, right, with the baker, and all of that happened, and then, even though I was released, I remember I was in prison with a Hebrew guy, and the Hebrew guy interpreted both of our dreams, and both of those dreams came to pass. In other words, go get him, because he might be able to tell you the interpretation of your dream, which the wise men and the magicians can't. So he says all of this to Pharaoh, but in the Quran, he says nothing. Okay.
I will tell you its interpretation, so send me forth. That's what he said.
Yeah.
Either or. We can't have both. We can't even combine them together. So the story narrative is completely different. And now if the Muslim insists that the Torah was corrupted, then they have to explain all the differences they have so far, even in that small fraction of the text of the event. When Joseph was rushed out of the prison before king without knowing what's going on. He doesn't know about dreams, has no interpretation yet. Only Pharaoh told him his dreams, and he told the Pharaoh directly interpretation.
Yeah, and then the cupbearer ends up, so the Quranic narrative, the cupbearer remembers which, by the way, he's not even called the cupbearer because the Quran doesn't really know who they are, because it says it actually doesn't say the surviving ex-prisoner. It says the one who was saved from the two.
Yeah.
Okay. After a long time said, I will tell you the interpretation. So the cupbearer is telling the king, I will tell you the interpretation, so send me away. So then he goes to prison, and in verse 46, the cupbearer goes to the prison, but in Genesis, the guards that go to the prison, not the cupbearer. The cupbearer just tells him, oh, there was a guy in prison. I remember he interpreted dreams. Right? He's not going to be the one that's sent to go fetch him. It's going to be the guards. Okay, and it uses masculine plural in Genesis, so it's not him. It's a group of men sent by Pharaoh, obviously. So here it's the cupbearer goes to the prison. Pharaoh doesn't even know where he's going. He just lets him leave. And then he goes and talks to Joseph, and he tells Joseph in the prison Pharaoh's dream. So Joseph's hearing Pharaoh's dream in prison, not by Pharaoh, in Pharaoh's presence. Whereas in Genesis, he doesn't hear the dream until he gets out of prison. They shave him quickly, get him prepared, change his clothes, bring him before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh tells him himself, okay, when he's standing in front of him. And then he interprets the dream directly to Pharaoh. But here, the cupbearer tells him while he's in prison. Joseph tells the interpretation to the cupbearer, not to Pharaoh, while he's still in prison. And in fact, the cupbearer leaves him in prison. Okay, because he said he's not going to go back, right? So then the king hears it, presumably, even though it skips it in the narrative, and he says, bring him to me. Meaning that he's not right in front of him, he's still in prison. So like everything is off. And the more you look at it closely, the more differences emerge, because the order's wrong, the location's wrong, who's talking to who is wrong, who knows what is going on is different, on and on and on and on. So that's why I'm like around this point where I'm analyzing, and I'm over 300 differences already.
And also, very important, the reason for Joseph in the Quran to deny coming to Pharaoh, he said, go back to Massa and ask him about the case of the woman who cut their hands. That story is not in the Torah. So in the Torah, he couldn't even ask for this woman, because there never been woman, nobody had their hands. But we have to go back in the Quran, or for that sake in Midrash, and read the story. Then we have the amazing story, colorful picture when woman start peeling the oranges with the knives, and Joseph appeared to them. He's so beautiful. They look at him, and they lost their control, and they start cutting their hands with knives.
Yeah, and what's funny is that the Quran has distorted telling of the Midrash. So not only is it telling Midrash legends that are not originally from the scriptures, which it's supposed to be only confirming the scriptures, not legends. The Quran doesn't say it confirms legends. It says it confirms the previous scriptures, right? So why is it talking about legends that were not in the scriptures? And then even when it does, it tells it in a distorted way. It gets the legends wrong. And the legends that it's supposedly confirming, or even though it's not saying it's confirming legends, but those stories, like the women cutting their hands at the banquet scene, which is earlier in the Joseph narrative, the Midrash is following the account we have in Genesis and adding in stories. So the way that it tells it, even in the Midrash, presupposes the account that we have in Genesis. It doesn't presuppose the Quranic account.
Interesting.
Well, we can go on and on.
Yeah, we can go on and on. And we haven't. So let me just say, as we conclude, though, you don't need to know all of this information.
Yeah.
The Muslims about it. We're just showing you that there is a ton.
Yeah.
And even this is the tip of the iceberg. So all we would normally share at this point with the second pillar, with the Joseph story, Alex's typical version is what he shared, right? Just the response of Jacob to the bloody shirt. No, I don't believe you. You're trying to trick me or whatever. And he obviously believes that Joseph is still alive. Whereas I would do the whole chapter 37 of Genesis, comparing it with Surah 12, verse 4 to 20, and which actually doesn't take as long as it did today. Interacting with, usually might take me 20 to 30 minutes, okay, in conversation with them. And what's powerful about that, we don't need to get into all these other things, but what's powerful about that is it's not just one or a few little details like in the shorter version. Now it's like there's so much.
Yep.
And you can see that one detail, you change it and it changes all the other stuff is related to it. The age of Joseph, whether he told the dreams to his brothers or not. Okay, where they were when they were plotting against him, in Dothan or near home. Did they ask for permission to take him, etc.? Was it Jacob's idea to send Joseph to go find them? All of these things are totally different, whether he was sold into slavery. So now it's like it's actually the point of this approach is to overwhelm them, which isn't like, it's not that we're trying to overwhelm them as a trick. We're trying to show them that it's actually overwhelmingly a big problem that they have no clue about and that needs to be addressed, right? And we're actually, even in that, we're only giving them a tiny sliver because there's probably maybe multiple thousands of differences that really should all be accounted for, right? So if they're stubborn, if they're like not dealing with it properly, we're just going to lay on more differences because if they're not like honestly dealing with the issues that we're presenting them, why would we move on to share with them stuff that is going to be weaker, is going to be stuff they're just going to reject? Like if we go on to the gospel, they're going to already reject that. So if they're rejecting this, they're going to reject that. So there's no point in us moving on to anything else until there's some acknowledgement from them that there's a problem and they're not able to address it. And then we can potentially start moving on. But you don't need to know all of this to share with them. But the more you know, then the more ammunition you have.
Right.
And if we're talking with somebody who's more knowledgeable, to go back to that illustration we used on a previous session, that's like trying to get the fuel you need to launch the rocket out into outer space. You need more fuel to resist a stronger pull of gravity. If their commitment to Islam and they're knowledgeable about all Islamic sources and everything is so strong, you need more pushback. Just like honestly, like if somebody is going to try to convert you or me, okay, whether to Islam or anything, okay, we're going to need a lot to convince us. It's not going to be like, oh, you showed me one problem in theology. There's one philosophical issue in your theology.
Yeah.
Or one ethical issue. You're going to be like, okay, well, maybe I don't have the answer. But what happens if it's hundreds? Right? So that's the point about overwhelming. It's not dishonest. The point is that's the reality and they don't know it. And if they would only face the issues, then hopefully they'll follow the truth. Yeah.
Excellent. So what do we got? Two more weeks or one more?
Whatever you give us, really. We got a lot to share.
What about maybe at least 2 weeks?
At least.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
So, because we got 3 more pillars to cover.
Okay.
They're shorter one.
They're shorter, but there is a lot we can talk about. There's always a lot to talk about for sure.
Well, what are you going to cover next week?
So it'll be about the most important stuff, about Abraham and Ishmael.
Okay.
And not about the sacrifice, which is what all the Christians and Muslims want to talk about.
Right.
It's the first question, which is the third pillar, is, did Abraham and Ishmael travel to Mecca and build the Kaaba?
Okay.
And then the fourth one, which is related, which hopefully we'll tackle at least those next 2, is Ishmael the father of the Arabs, especially in that region around Mecca? And related to that is Muhammad a descendant of Ishmael?
Okay.
Okay. So, and you know, the teaser, the answer is going to be no to all of the above. Okay. From the Torah. So, yeah, but we need to know the Christians need to know the Islamic narrative, which they don't know.
Right.
Even many of the apologists, I'm like surprised they don't know. And then we can actually compare.
Right.
Okay. And it's quite striking when you put them side by side and are asking the right questions.
So, do you know the like the passages that you're going to be comparing next week?
Yeah. Well, if somebody wants to look up something in advance,
Well,
okay.
I thought I would try to do my homework.
Yeah. Okay. So the main things I can. Okay. So the main passages to compare is in a hadith in Bukhari, and it's 3,364, 3364. That's the numbering you'd find like on sunnah.com. The hadith right after it, 3365, is also similar, but you have all you need in the 3364. And that tells you the narrative of Abraham taking Hagar and Ishmael down to Mecca, and then at the end of it, building the Kaaba. And it also indicates in that hadith who he marries, who Ishmael marries. So all of that actually covers both pillars, the third and the fourth, that we're going to cover. And then we compare, the main passage we compare with that is Genesis 21. And the larger context of that, and it's easier to remember, is if you read the first 21 verses. So 21, 1 to 21. And there are a couple contextual verses that we look at as well. The last two verses of chapter 16 of Genesis, I think it's 14, 15. It's just how old Abraham is when when Ishmael is born, and then 23 to 25, chapter 17, 23 to 25 is the circumcision of Abraham and Ishmael and how old they are. Yeah, and then chapter 21, 1 to 21. That's the main passage to compare with the hadith, because it is it's the story that we're comparing is when Hagar and Ishmael separate from Abraham.
Okay.
Sorry, Alex, you were saying something.
I just said Genesis 20 verse 1. Give us location.
20 verse 1 as well. Yeah, it tells you the location and Gerar where they live.
So basically, geography and timing of event will prove Quran is wrong in many ways.
Yeah, those are the main issues: the geography and ages of people.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sounds good, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me tonight. And I was just thinking, if we don't, for some reason, we don't get through with this, I mean, I'm going to have some time on my hands while I'm in California. We could even do one night there, but we'll see how it turns out. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Well, bless you guys, and thank you so much again for being with me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.